Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at something that's absolutely fundamental to our daily lives, the architecture of trust. Now, when we say governance, don't just picture a bunch of politicians sitting around in a room. Think of it more as a meticulously engineered system, one that's specifically designed to solve our very human flaws. I mean, how do we actually ensure fairness? How do we prevent corruption from creeping in? Well, let's find out.
Here is our quick roadmap for today's 2,500-year journey. We are going to start with the meaning of probity, then dive into the philosophical roots of governance, examine the bureaucratic machine, look at why probity matters today, and finally, we'll wrap up with the challenge of soft societies.
All right, Section 1, the foundation. Let's get right into the meaning of probity.
Okay, let's dive into this. We hear buzzwords like transparency and ethics thrown around all the time on the news, right? But to really understand the ultimate benchmark of good governance, we need to pin down exactly what we're talking about. Probity comes from the Latin word probitas, which simply means good. But it goes way beyond just being a nice person. It's the quality of having really strong moral principles, things like honesty, integrity, transparency, and crucially, strictly following them. It's often defined as confirmed, incorruptible integrity. Now, in governance, it means that the institutions themselves uphold this procedural uprightness. It literally shouldn't matter who happens to be sitting in the big chair on any given day. The system itself has to adopt an ethical approach that can easily withstand intense public scrutiny.
Moving on to Section 2, the blueprints. Let's explore the philosophical roots of governance.
So how do we actually build this incorruptible system? Well, we have to look back at how ancient philosophers drafted the early blueprints to engineer trust. Let's start with Aristotle. He really laid the foundation for what we consider good governance today. And he had this brilliant analogy. He said the one who is ruled is like the master of flutes, and the ruler is the flute player who makes use of it. It's such a great image, isn't it? It perfectly illustrates the relationship between the ruler and the ruled. The state, the citizens, they are the instrument. The ruler is simply the musician who's been entrusted to bring out the harmony. They don't own the flute. They are just permitted to play it well.
But, keeping that harmony playing perfectly, that is incredibly difficult. Aristotle's teacher, Plato, actually saw this as a sort of tragic, slow-motion train wreck. Plato believes society needs harmonious functioning, right? The part works for the whole. He argued that a just government starts up at step 1 as an aristocracy, ideally ruled by wise, unwilling philosopher-kings. But then human nature inevitably creeps in. The system disintegrates into a timocracy, where rulers just fight for ego and honor. Then, as the focus shifts entirely to wealth, it drops down into an oligarchy. From there, it fractures into a democracy, which, by the way, Plato didn't view as an ideal, but rather as different groups just fighting for their own competing agendas. And finally, all that chaos leads to tyranny, where a strong dictator steps in and wipes out the democratic process. It's a pretty sobering mini-narrative of how a perfect society can slowly rot into complete tyranny if you don't have probity holding it all together.
As history rolled on, philosophers fiercely debated how to stop this decay, and it led to a massive philosophical split. On one side, we've got Machiavelli. He laid the foundation for realpolitik. His ruthless pragmatism basically argued that the ends justify the means. If you need to break a few rules to maintain state power, so be it. But contrast that sharply with the other side, Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill, with their theory of qualitative utilitarianism. Their idealistic, public-focused view argued that governance absolutely must be measured by providing the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people. So you have this constant, exhausting tug-of-war between pragmatic survival and ethical ideals.
Which brings us to Section 3, the machine. We're talking about Max Weber's bureaucracy.
To bridge that huge gap between high ethical ideals and gritty political reality, society needed a mechanism. Enter Max Weber. His 19th century vision of bureaucracy was basically a mechanical structure explicitly designed to strip away human error. Weber mapped out how power works into 3 categories. First, you have charismatic domination. People obey because they have faith in the exceptional qualities of a specific ruler. Second, traditional domination, obeying just because of the goodness of the past. This is how we've always done it. But look at that third category. This is where modern probity lives. Legal, rational domination. Here, people believe in the rightness of the law itself, enacted through uniform procedure. The legitimacy comes from the rules, not the person, and the apparatus you need to make that work, bureaucracy.
Weber outlines some very specific features for a bureaucracy designed for a society where everyone is supposed to be equal. You need a hierarchy for unity of command, strict rules, a merit-based hiring system, unified control, and rigorous record-keeping. But pay close attention to those last couple of phrases. impersonal relationship, and complete dehumanization. I know, that sounds incredibly harsh, right? Almost dystopian. But the logic is that by completely stripping away personal biases, emotions, and favors, you get rational consistency. You get equal treatment. The machine doesn't care who you know. It literally only cares about the rules.
But what happens when this machine gets a little too powerful? Weber himself actually saw the dark side of his own blueprint. He famously warned that the power position of a fully developed bureaucracy is everywhere overpowering. Once you establish it, it becomes one of the absolute hardest social structures to ever destroy.
Because it's so powerful, Weber noted that the fate of a bureaucracy really depends on three vital factors. First, how is socio-economic power distributed? If society is deeply unequal, the bureaucracy just feeds off that inequality. Karl Marx actually criticized bureaucracy for this exact reason, arguing it just becomes a tool for the rich to control everybody else. Second, information distribution. Weber pointed out that secrecy is the ultimate tool bureaucracy develops to maintain its dominance. The only way to fight bureaucratic secrecy is by forcing information out to the people. And third, it depends heavily on the executives at the top, how the politicians actually choose to use the machine.
All right, Section 4, Blueprint versus Reality. Let's talk about why probity matters today.
I want you to think for just a second about your own experiences with government services. Think about getting a driver's license, or dealing with taxes, or relying on public infrastructure. That reality check is exactly why this matters. Probity builds trust in the institutions of the state, and a belief that actions will be for the welfare of the beneficiaries. It's the ultimate safeguard. It checks the abuse of power by the government organs that touch our lives every single day: the police, public health, education. It ensures the system works for socioeconomic development, not just to line the pockets of the people running the system.
So to pull this off, we rely on a modern operating manual. These principles of probity include integrity, transparency, objectivity, and accountability. It demands selflessness from public servants, a real commitment to equity and inclusiveness, strict adherence to the rule of law, and a very deliberate management of conflicts of interest. Look, this isn't just some nice-to-have wish list. This is the bedrock of a functioning governance system. Without these principles firmly bolted into place, public confidence completely shatters.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the stress test, the challenge of soft societies.
Because here is the really harsh truth. Even the most perfectly designed bureaucratic machine falls to corruption if the society running it lacks discipline. The Scandinavian economist Gunnar Myrdal studied India and coined this term, the soft society. He defined it as a society where there's a lack of will to enact laws, a lack of will to implement even the existing laws, and a profound lack of discipline at all levels. Just let that sink in for a moment. You can have all the rules in the world on paper, but if you lack the systemic willpower to actually enforce them, your probity crumbles.
When a society goes soft and fails to enforce its own rules, the fallout is severe. You get rampant corruption. You get opacity, where decisions are made behind closed doors without any transparency. You end up with incredibly poor value systems and ultimately zero accountability or incentive to actually do the right thing. These aren't just one-off scandals. They are glaring symptoms of a system failing to uphold probity and bleeding public trust every single day.
Which brings us to the final question I want to leave you with today. Look at the systems around you. Is our society truly equipped to enforce probity, or are we just a soft society masquerading as a functional bureaucracy? Think about public trust, accountability, and the flute players in our own governments. Understanding these mechanics is the first real step toward demanding a better architecture for our trust. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.